Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Welcome. Today we're going to be learning Maseches Beitzah, Daf Lamed Gimel. We have a little bit more ground to cover than usual. We're going to be starting at the Mishnah, which is 2/3 of the way down on Lamed Beis. Lamed Beis, a fresh Mishnah, which will actually be very helpful. And we will be ending about 10 lines or so from the bottom of Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis at the two dots there, Umegabe Mina Chatzer. So we've been discussing a variety of different halachos of muksa, and we're going to be continuing that discussion as well. We are, I'm sure at this point, familiar with the overarching machlokes that exists between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon as to whether or not muksa, as we know it, is in effect, which is shitas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who was more mekil. So we'll see a couple of these applications tonight as well. The Mishnah opens on Lamed Beis, 2/3 of the way down, as follows: Ein shover nesacheres ve'ein choschen esaniyar. One is not allowed to break earthenware. One is not allowed to cut up pieces of paper, litzlos bo meliach, in order to roast a particular kind of fish. The concern was that had it been in direct contact with the very bottom of the oven, it would burn. So what they wanted to do was kind of create some type of separation from the bottom. Now, the way that we have modified that in our ovens is we have grates and then we cook inside pans. But if you were in fact to take food and put it directly on the very, very bottom of your oven, it would scorch. So that was their practical concern. They didn't have our technologies. What did they do in its place? So they would take pieces of cheres and crack them up in a way where it would allow for the fish to not touch the bottom of the pan. Or they would take paper of some kind, paper that wouldn't be combustible, I guess, whatever that was. And they would do that in order to prevent burning. But that wasn't allowed. We'll see why in the Gemara. Ve'ein gorfen tanur v'kirayim. One is also not allowed to sweep out the ash from the various types of ovens that they had. Aval mechabshin, one could lay them out smoothly. One could flatten out the ash to make sure, again, as mentioned, that the fish would not burn at the bottom of the oven. Seemingly an unrelated din. Ve'ein makifin shtei chavios. You're not allowed to roll two barrels, one next to the other, with a distance between them. Lishbos alein sakadera, and then put a grate in between the two barrels. So if you could imagine, you have two barrels, one over here, one over here. They're 5 feet apart. You take a grill and you put it, a 5-foot grill across, resting on the top of each barrel. And you put your pot of food in the middle and you light a fire underneath. Very practical, assuming that the barrels don't catch on fire. But let's assume that it was a contained fire. So that's a wonderful idea, except that says the Mishnah, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to roll into place two barrels to then put the kedera on top of them. You're not allowed to rest a pot on small pieces of wood. These words, and so too a door, are very difficult to understand. The Gemara will help us understand what it means. And the last din of the Mishnah, part 3 of the Mishnah, the last line of the Mishnah, 3/4 of the way down on Lamed Beis, one cannot be manheg, one cannot guide an animal with a stick on Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer, Reb Shimon matir. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Reb Shimon, this is the Reb Shimon of the Machlokes of Muksa, so this is his son, he's matir. So the Gemara is going to say, oh, look, he's just like his father, that he says that there's no din muksa. We'll see that that's not the case, but that would have been our first impression. The Meforshim here at the open of the Gemara indicates that we need some clarity as to what my taima is referring to. And therefore, the Meforshim on the side in the Hagos V'Tzionim in the Oz V'Hadar indicate that we're really talking about the first 2 dinim of the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says in Shover Mesakelim and also in Choschen Asani are my taima, why are those things not allowed? Because you're effectively creating a kli that filters, that ensures that the fish is not touching the bottom of the oven. Yes, you're breaking something and tearing paper. All that's true. But that's not in and of itself the problem. The problem is that you've created a solution to a problem. It's as if you've created a new kli. Says the Gemara, up to the 2 dots, we're about 15, 20 lines from the bottom of Lamed Beis, Ve'en gorfen tanur v'kirayim. One is not allowed to sweep out the oven at its bottom. Tani Reb Chia bar Yosef Kame de Rav Nachman, v'imi efshar le'efos eleim kein gorfo mutter. If one is not able to cook without sweeping it out, then mutter they are allowed to do. So we would override this rabbinic concern for the sake of Simchas Yom Tov, no problem. De bisu de Reb Chia, when Reb Chia's wife was cooking, there was a brick that fell into the oven on Yom Tov. They would often use bricks because they maintain heat pretty well. They hold heat very well. Stones, we've seen this before in other environments where stones hold a lot of heat. So if they wanted to keep a certain temperature in the oven and they didn't have a lot of wood, they would warm up a brick. So the brick fell into the oven, but her husband, Reb Chia, wanted to have something cooked properly without the brick in the oven because it took up a lot of space. Amar la Reb Chia, Amar la Reb Chia said to his wife, Chazi, I want you to see I need very good bread. Now, in our parlance, we would not have understood the subtleties here. It's the way that they spoke, but it was code word for get that brick out of the oven. We want food cooked regularly. Again, it's different constructs of cooking, but that is what was happening here. Amarle Rava l'shame. Rava says to his shamish, to his servant, Tavi li bar abza. I want you to cook for me a duck. And please be careful not to burn it, implying that there should be a way that you can cook it without burning it, without being in violation of our Mishnah. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. Amar lan Rav Achami Hutzal. Rav Achami Hutzal said, Demar sharkin le tenura b'yom. He says that you are allowed to be sharkin. What does that word mean? So the way that their ovens used to work is that they would seal in the heat by taking some dough, and there would be a cover on the oven, and they would take some dough and they would put it all around the space to make it effectively somewhat airtight to keep all the heat in. That was what they would do. Of course, the fire was outside the oven underneath, so there was still oxygen, but they were just putting a lot of heat it's like a pressure cooker of some kind. That's how they would end up cooking. It wasn't completely airtight. That would be very dangerous. But you were allowed to do that. And then says the Gemara that it wasn't stam. You were allowed to do this with dough at Amarle anan arikta de pras samchina. And we can use the mud of the Pras, the Pras River, the Euphrates River. Apparently that was their locale. And the mud there was already, the consistency was not like very liquidy and also not very mud. It kind of was like a little bit more pasty. So that was already prepared and that was fine. Ariksa de prasam chinan v'hani mili who did saire me esmol, as long as you set aside a section for which you were going to be using it over the course of Yom Tov because it needed to be mucham. Says the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom on Lamed Beis and Beis as follows. Amar Avina, the kitma shari. At any time, you are allowed to use ash. Now, it doesn't just mean ash because ash alone would not seal the oven. So what they would do is they would take some water and add it to the ash. That was not considered a problem of lush because ash and water don't really, it's not like adding it to flour where the flour absorbs the water particles and it kind of becomes dough. Ash doesn't do that. When it dehydrates, it goes right back to being ash again. It doesn't really work that way with flour, so this is going to be permissible as well. At the 2 dots, let's continue. We said ve'ein makifin shtei chavios. You can't take 2 barrels, put them a few feet apart, and then cook meat in between them on a grate. And then the Gemara is going to get into some side issues about this. Amar Rav Nachman, how does this compare to the following case? Avanim shel Beitzah Kisei, back in the day when they needed to make an ad hoc bathroom, what they would do is they would take 2 stones that the person could sit on with a gap in the middle so they could properly go to the bathroom. You're allowed to put them side by side next to one another on Yom Tov, again with enough space to make sure that they could go to the bathroom. Hold on 1 second. Why are you allowed to make that ad hoc bathroom with the 2 stones? Hare, we have our Mishnah. You're not allowed to move the 2 barrels next to one another. So why would you be allowed to do this? Says the Gemara, you're comparing things that can't be compared. It's different. When you have your 2 barrels and you put a pot on top of let's say you have your 2 barrels, 5-foot barrels, and then you have something going across a grate, and then you put a pot on top. So that's an ohel. And you're not allowed to make an oil on Shabbos. Masha'en Kain, in our case, that's not true. When you're taking the stones and you're making some type of temporary bathroom, there is no ohel. So Amalei Rabazuta the Rabashi Elameata, according to what you are saying, that the concern is about ohel, then Bana Itztaba B'Yom Tov Delo Avid Allah. Let's say that a person makes a temporary chair, and Itztaba is used many different ways throughout Shas and Maseches. In Maseches Sukkah, it was used as like kind of like a block of some kind, but this is a chair. You're making some type of chair that's made out of loose stones, and there's no ohel. So hachaname deshari, should we say that because there's no din of ohel, that therefore making this chair should be mutter? Says the Gemara, no. Amar leHasam, when it comes to the sugya of building furniture in general, binyan keva asra Torah, we know that on a Torah level, that's completely not allowed. And binyan arai lo asra Torah, midrabbanan, it's mutter, but v'gazru rabbanan al binyan arai mishum binyan keva. You want to build a chair, granted it's not permanent, but even if you have a binyan arai, we don't allow you to make that on Shabbos because it's exera derabbanan unless you then make a binyan kavua. But here by the avanim to go to the bathroom, the side-by-side stones with the gap in the middle, mishum kvodo. Here, because we have a din of kavod abrios, we know that kavod abrios is a din. The language of the Gemara throughout Shas is gadol kavod abrios shedoche davar min haTorah. So we don't actually translate it that way. It means that you can violate a din derabanan because of kavod abrios. Mishum kvodo, because of kavod abrios, we don't have the gzeira derabanan lo gazer be'rabanan to take the stones. Therefore, if a person had to go to the bathroom on Shabbos and they were completely stuck and all they had was a collection of bricks, they could build their temporary bathroom out of the bricks. No problem. That's not a problem of ohel. What about the gzeira derabanan of building on Shabbos? Oh, provided that you're not cementing the bricks together. In a chanami, you're right. That would not normally be allowed. But here it's allowed because kavod abrios is docha. And then on the very last line, the Gemara presents a little bit of a unique structure. Amar Rav Yehuda, Hai Midurta, this was a particular type of bonfire. You can build it milamala lamata shari. You can build it from the top down. Those of us familiar with the laws of gravity should recognize this is very, very difficult. How do you build from the top down? So the Mefarshim explained that you would basically hold a section of it which contained the wood up here, and other people would build the structure that goes underneath it. That's how Rashi explained. So I'll hold the fire. You come in and you'll put in the temporary bricks to hold it up. Lamala lamata shari, building from top to bottom is fine. Lamata lamala, but to build it from the ground up, that is usur. This is true in regards to eggs. What is this talking about? Rashi says, top of Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, this is Beitzos Gasos. We're talking about the eggs, whatever the largest egg that exists in nature, whatever it is of a kosher bird. We know the ostrich egg is huge. I don't know what the largest kosher one is. I don't think it compares in size, but still, whatever it is, as long as it's a tefach, then it could be a problem. Then it could be a problem of ohel, because ohel in order to have an ohel, it has to be a minimum of a tefach. So therefore, that's our concern. So let's say you wanted to put the egg to be the top of something to be an ohel. Great. Hold the egg here and have everyone build around it. Lamala, lamata is okay. Lamata, lamala is not. V'chein kdera with a pot as well. V'chein puri, I'm making a bed as well. If you needed to put one together, have people hold up the mattress and then put the cinder blocks underneath, no problem. V'chein chavisa, the same is true with barrels. If you're going to make a structure out of barrels, barrel vertical, barrel horizontal, cutting across the top. Under those circumstances, we go milamala lamata. So it says the Gemara, the din of our Mishnah, Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph on the second line, our Mishnah had stated the din, ve'in somchen esakder bebikas, you're not allowed to rest a pot on top of small pieces of wood. And we said v'chein bedelas. What does that mean? Bedelas sal kadaitach. Rashi explains what this means. Rashi is about a third of the way down within the Rashis. Dibur hamaschil bedelas sal kadaitach. Umize hasamech kadera bedelas. Who's going to hang a pot of food from the door? That's not normal. And it's interesting to note that Rashi writes, "V'halo tishaber." Our doors would not break if you found a creative way to hang a pot on it. It's not a very good idea, but our doors have a lot more integrity than their doors did. But Rashi says it can't. No, the door.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
No. Hello, Tishaber. Our doors swing. Yeah, their doors probably swung also because we've already seen examples of their doors with hinges.
Leather hinges.
What?
Yeah, leather hinges.
Not in all cases, because we learned already about because Rashi elsewhere described where the door would have a receiving hole and the wall would have an extending peg, and you'd pick. It's very similar to our doors, actually. Yeah, you just literally drop it on. They had some kind of structure like that. It seems from Rashi, not like what your question was. I know you weren't saying it, but from the way you were asking, it doesn't seem that way. It seems like the door would break. And then anyways, the Gemara says that's not what we mean anyways. Ela ema v'chein hadeles, that a door can't be put on small pieces of wood, just like the pot can't be put on small pieces of wood. Namely, the small pieces of wood are muksa. And Tanu Rabbanan, why is that? Ein somchen esakder b'bekas v'chein hadeles, that we can't put small pieces of wood under a pot or under a door. Lefi shelo nasnu eitzim ela lahasaka. This is the ground most fundamental understanding of this idea. Wood, in halachic terms, has one purpose, and that is to be burnt. And therefore, if you're using it for any other purpose, it is not allowed. So therefore, you can't rest it on top of a piece of wood. We use them as door jambs all the time, but when they're set aside, they're miyuchad l'kach. That's different here. We're not talking about something that's miyuchad l'kach. We're talking about random wood that you find on Yom Tov. So if you want to just burn it, no problem. You want to use it to prop your door open and it wasn't muchan, then that's not allowed. But that's what's going on in our Mishnah. And then what does our Mishnah say in that regard? Our Mishnah then said, the Reb Shimon matir. Okay, let's go to the last din of our Mishnah, line 6 or 5 on Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. We said that one is not allowed to be manhig to guide an animal with a makel, with a stick. Rebbe Lazar b'Reb Shimon matir. Lema, maybe we should say Rebbe Lazar b'Reb Shimon ke'avuha svirale to lesle muksa. What do we see here? Rebbe Lazar b'Reb Shimon says there's no problem with taking a stick to guide an animal. So that seems to imply that he doesn't have a problem with the stick, which seems to imply that there's no muksa, which seems to imply that he holds like his father, Reb Shimon, who holds that there's no muksa. Perfect. Everything is kaftor referach, except the Gemara rejects this completely. Low, it's not correct. Quarter of the way down. In this case with the animal, afilu Reb Shimon modeh, even Reb Shimon would agree that this is problematic. Mishum demechse keman de'azil lechinga. This doesn't look right. You're walking down the street with a stick and you're guiding an animal. That doesn't look right. It looks like you're taking him lechinga. We've had this word somewhere in Shas before, and lechinga means that it looks like you're taking him to the marketplace to sell him, and it kind of smells like mekach memkar. It looks like you're trying to do business on Yom Tov, and that's not appropriate. And basically, this din in our Mishnah, according to Reb Shimon, has nothing to do with Hilchos Muktzah at all. It just doesn't look right. It's again, the right language is a little hard to tell. Is it a question of mekach memkar? Is it uvdin dechol? Got to get into the halachic terminologies, but nevertheless, that's the problem. Chizra, the Gemara says a third of the way down. Rashi explains what a chizra is. This Rashi is halfway down on the page. Dibur hamaschel chizra. It's anaf eitz. It's a branch made out of wood. Shehu chad. It's very sharp, kikos, like a thorn. Ve'ra'ui letak'o bitzli kimo shvod shipud v'litzlos bo. These are the marshmallow sticks, right? Or probably bigger. It's probably for a spit is what they were talking about, but they're very sharp and they're very thin. What is the halachic status of these? An Yom Tov, Rav Nachman Asar, Rav Sheshes Shari. Rav Nachman says they're no good, and Rav Sheshes says they're fine. Now let's see, where is this machlokas taking place? This has two approaches in the Gemara. Here's approach number one. Birativa, when this chizra, when this very strong, this very narrow, sharp stick was saturated with moisture, kule alma lo pligi de asr. Everyone agrees that that's useless for fire. Ki pligi biya beshta, when it is in fact a dry piece of wood. Man de asar, the shita of Rav Nachman, who says you're not allowed to use it. Amar lach lo nitnu eitzim ela lahasaka. Like we learned earlier, the only time we're allowed to use wood on Yom Tov, the standing assumption of wood is that it's lahasaka, it's for burning. But you're taking this and you're using it as a spit. You're putting marshmallows on it. You're putting a small animal on it. So he says you're not allowed to do that. Uman deshari, the shita of Rav Sheshes, how would he argue? Amar lach, this is such a great svara. Mali litzlos bo, mali litzlos begachal to. Who cares if I'm roasting food on it or if I'm burning it as part of the fire to then cook something above it? Who cares? The same thing is happening because of this stick. Who cares? That's a very interesting response. But the Gemara says all of this is approach number one. Again, approach number one is that everyone agrees if the stick was moist, it cannot be used. And if the stick was dry, we have our machlokas. But Ika de Amre, almost halfway down on Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, there are those who say that the machlokas between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes is only the opposite, Biya Beshta. Biya Beshta, Kule Alma Lo Pligi Deshari. Everyone agrees that if it's dry, everyone agrees that you can use this spit. This is a kula. This is a more lenient approach. Ki pligi, where do Rav Sheshes and Rav Nachman have their machlokas? Birativta, where the chizra, where this stick, this pointed stick, is moist. Manda asar, the one who says that you're not allowed, that's because the lo chazila hasaka, because it can't be burned. Umanda shari, the shita that says that it's mutter to use this even though it's moist. Amar lach hachazila hesek gadol, is that had the wood been put into a very hot fire, or in this case, it's worded as a very large fire, so it's going to dry out very, very quickly. The moisture is going to be pulled very quickly, and therefore, no problem at all. If you have a huge bonfire and you have, the fire's already raging and you throw in a log of wood that is moist, within minutes, it will be relatively dry. Same assumption here. The Hilchasa, how do we paskin within these two approaches? Says the Gemara, we paskin that Yabeshta Shari, Ritivta Usr. It's interesting, this is not a clean understanding of either approach. It's kind of taking a little bit from both, because it's saying that we hold that everyone agrees that Yabeshta is going to be mutter. That is each of these parts of the psak are taken from the various two versions that precede, and Ritivta Usr, and that's not allowed. So that's how we would paskin. If you wanted to cook with if you wanted to throw in a piece of wet wood, so said the Gemara says that that's not allowed. Darash Rava, we have in our cases when we have bonfires, we have metal tongs that are used to move wood around. but they didn't have metal tongs. They had a tool called an oud, an aleph vav dalet, which was the tool. It was a wood tool that was used to move the wood around in order to make sure that the fire could continue. So halfway down, the Gemara says, 6-7 lines before the new Mishnah, Darash Rava, Isha loti kanis ladir, ladir ha'etzim. A woman should not enter into the wood shed, litol mehen ud, to take the piece of wood that is used to guide the pieces of wood inside the fire. And not only that, v'ud shenishbar, had it been that this tool had broken, asr lahasiko b'yom. Why would it be asr to use this? Why can't you burn it? Because the fisha masikin b'kelim ve'en masikin b'shivre kelim. Because you're not allowed to use broken things that broke on Yom Tov, and if the oud broke, it's masikin b'shivre kelim, and that's not allowed. So the Gemara makes a diuk on this. This whole statement about the oud was from Rava, and he implied that and he didn't imply. He said ein masikin b'shivre kelim, which sounds like he holds of muksa. L'meimra de Rava ki Rabbi Yehuda svir le'disle muksa. Is that really true? Does Rava hold like Rabbi Yehuda that there is a din of muksa? How can that be? Ha'amar le Rava l'shame. Rava had said to his servant, Tavi li bar avs, I want you to make me some dinner. V'shadi me'eha l'shunra, and I want you to take the innards of the animal that really should be categorically muksa. They're miyas, they have no use for you. You can't eat them anyways. Leave them be. But he told them to proactively take them and throw them to the shunra, give them to the cat. It's a whole meal. You don't have to buy the cans. Everything is perfect. This is a full meal for the animals. So says the Gemara, that's not a good raya. That doesn't prove anything. Hasam over there, Kevan de Misarche, since they're disgusting, he was planning on this. And because he was planning on this, he knew before Yantif that there were going to be innards. He has a cat in the house. So good, everything is fine. And therefore he had a das, which implies that Rava does hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that there is a whole world of muksa. That brings us to a new Mishnah about 10 lines from the bottom of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. So it says the new Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, no tel adam kise mishalafanam lachzos boshina. Toothpicks. You're allowed to take a splinter of wood to use them to clean out your teeth, no problem. That's din number 1 of the Mishnah. Din number 2, umegabe min hachatzer umadlik. One is allowed to collect from their chatzer anything they want. They can collect anything and they can use it to light any sticks, anything that's on the ground that's flammable. Why? Says the Mishnah, shekol mashe b'chatzer muchanu. Because the standing assumption is that anything that's in your yard is mukhan. That's what we assume, is that in your head, it's kind of like a halachic assumption that because it's in your yard, it can't mean, by the way, that the twigs that fall down on Shabbos. That can't be. We're just talking about twigs that were there from before. Let's say you have no tree that's hanging over your yard. That would make things more complicated, but it's all considered mukhanu. Now, I don't know that this would apply for us. We'd probably still treat them as muksa. Whenever I'm walking down the street and the kids are kicking a stick, I'm like, just be careful, that's probably muksa or possibly muksa. On Yom Tov, that may not be, because it's mutter to light a fire. Do we consider that mukhan if it's in my chazer? So the applications to today are a little difficult because we don't light fires that way, though it is mutter. The Chachamim omrim, in contrast with the Tanakama, who says that everything in our chazer is considered mukhan, the Chachamim say, Megavev mishalafanav umadlik, that which is right in front of you in your home, no problem, that you can light. And Rashi finishes the sentence for us, 10 lines from the bottom. You're not allowed in the chatzar. So there's a distinction here, just a general machlokes of the psychology of a person. Do we assume that which is in our chatzar is automatically considered mukhan or not? That is a machlokes here in the Tana, and we'll see more sources on this in the Gemara. Lastly, ein motziin es ha'or. One should not create fire on Yom Tov, lo min ha'etzim, by rubbing wood together, lo min ha'avanim, by taking flint stones, which are known for making sparks, lo min ha'afar. They had a way of heating up afar in special ways. It's not so clear. I mean, Rashi speaks about this a little bit. Take a look at Rashi, 2 lines from the bottom. In afar, karka kasha, it's very hard ground. Kshechofer nosa motzia or ke'ein gargishta shalanu mimakom machpores shala. There was some special way to dig. There was so much friction, similar to the wood, I presume. V'lo min ha're'afim, from the tiles on their roofs could get extremely hot. This we've experienced before. Probably not so much with the tiles on our roofs, though they do get very hot. The architectural ones, I'm sure they do. But like if you go, like the ones in Israel, like the red ones, like those can get piping hot. They're really impossible to touch. You could literally scramble an egg on them. They're boiling hot. That's not allowed. V'lo min hamayim, What is that? It sounds a little bit counterintuitive. So what they would do is they would have water in a container, and water refracts light. And if you hold it at the right angle, it can be used in some form like a magnifying glass, and therefore generate that. And again, these are created when we were little kids. I remember in Hill Torah, we took magnifying glass, and we got in trouble because we actually burned a hole in the rubber mat that was supposed to protect us from falling and hurting ourselves in the playground. So our teachers took away the magnifying glasses. Good. Anyway, says the Gemara, ve'ein malabnin es harafim. You can also not heat up, from the language of libun, not lavan, but libun. You're not allowed to make it that hot intentionally. Litzlos bahem. That's not appropriate to do on Yom Tov. And that brings us to the end of the mission. A lot of unique halachos here. We're not going to get to learn all of them because we're going to be stopping soon. But Amar Rav Yehuda, the first din of our Gemara, as we turn to the top of Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, is as follows: Ochle behema, foods of animals, ein bahem mishum tikun kli. There's no problem with you preparing those foods. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple. Esvei, we have a source in the Tanaim that seems to not agree with that. Rav Kahana, Esvei Rav Kahana, the Rav Yehuda, he asks as follows: Mitaltalin. A person is allowed to carry atze besamim, good smelling leaves, to smell them. Of course, you have to make a bracha on them. We Ashkenazim, when we say Havdalah, it's usually on something that's ground up, and we say the bracha borei minei v'samim. Sephardim usually do it on leaves, and the bracha changes to borei isvei v'samim. Over the years, I've done a number of brisim in Sephardic environments where I did not know what was going on, except for my own very narrow responsibility. But there were flowers and things going all over the place. Certainly, you may well know, there were certainly hadassim, and there was a lot of brachos being made, and I did not, Rabbi Rock, I'm like, just tell me what to do and when to do it and what brachos to make. I didn't know what was going on. So of course you have to make brachos on them. Rabbi Robinson has shared this from the pulpit before, I believe, a very interesting halacha. If you're not sure if something actually still has a smell and you're planning on using it for besamim, you're allowed to smell it first to see if it has a smell with which you could then use it for Havdalah, where you would then make a bracha on it, which is amazing. That's an unbelievable idea, but it's a birchas hanen, and like any other, but you have to make sure that it's present. So that's anyways a unique shita. Just don't forget to make the brachos. Sometimes we do this on Shabbos, like people have the snuff. It has to actually be made bori pri hadama, bori pri ha'etz, whatever you're smelling, bori isvei v'samim, whatever the bracha is, because the whole point is to add brachos. We're supposed to have mea brachos b'chol yom. But whereas during the week our Shmona Esreis are 19 Shmona Esreis times 3 is 57 brachos. On Shabbos it's only 7 brachos. It's a whole whatever. It's a very huge difference. So when you're trying to chop around and get to 100 brachos, it's a little harder. So that's why certainly in certain circles, people have this, these borei isvei b'samim. You have to be careful what the bracha is. It's not simple what the bracha is on a lot of them, because how finely are they ground up? What are they really made out of? It's really not so simple. So you should just get cinnamon. When a ground cinnamon, we know what it is, and the hadassim, we know what it is. But unless you're a baki b'davar, ask a shayla. What? Right.
Enjoy it.
If you smell it, is it subjective or objective? Do you get to choose what to make a bracha on? Let's say you like the smell of something that doesn't smell good to anybody else. Is it kolatam? Is it a hana for you or not for me? I like the way pipes smell. I don't like the way cigarettes smell. Right. So I don't know. Anyways, so this is Rav Kahana's question. We said it on the very top line in the name of Rabbi Huda that there's no tikkun, there's no problem of tikkun kli when it comes to the food of animals. Yet over here we see that we're allowed to carry the besamim lahariach ulahanif bahen lechola, and you can wave it in the air next to a chola, which apparently was helpful. Probably not scientifically, but maybe in some other way. Umolo meriach, well, you could even roll it in your hands to create some greater intensity of smell. That's fine. But here's where we get into the problem. V'lo yiktemenu lahariach, but you couldn't cut them. Why can't you cut them? You just said that things which are typically eaten by animals, there's no tikkun kli. So who cares? This food is typically eaten by animals. They'll eat any leaves. If you have a vegetarian animal, a herbivore, they're gonna eat it. They're not gonna be picky about it. So then that's also food that belongs to an animal. So how can Rabbi Yehuda say on the top of the page that ein bahem mishum tikun kli? Here we see v'lo yiktemenu lahariach, where you're not allowed to cut it. But let's finish the brisa because we're not done yet. V'im kitamo, if in fact you did cut these things to get the smell pater avalasar, which is of course the Gemara's code word for an iser derabanan. Lachtos boshinav, and if you were to break a piece of wood in order to make yourself a toothpick, lo yiktemenu, you should not do that. V'im kitmo chayav chatos. So says the Gemara, that's a kasha in Rabbi Yehuda. Amar le, you asked such a good question. Hashta pater avalasar kakashali chayiv chatas mibaya. You went out, you overdid it. You asked such a good question. My gosh, you did good. You knocked me out of the park. The pater avalasar was enough, but then you went all the way to bring me a case of chayiv chatas. You got me with the first part of the Beitzah. You're right. It's a good point. But he kind of kicks back after he gives his very gentle embrace of the Musar, and he says, no, Ela kitanya hahi, the Beitzah that you just quoted from line 2 to line 6 right here on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, that was talking about percussion. That was talking about with foods that are with vegetation that's very hard. However, when it comes to, the Gemara is implying this, but when there's something that's very soft, that's what Rabbi Yehuda was being matir on the top line. So when it comes to something that's very soft, there's no problem with cutting it because, as Rabbi Yehuda says on the top line, by ochle behema ein b'mishum tikun kli. It's only a problem in the Beitzah when it's kosher. Says the Gemara, how can that be? Caution. If this Beitzah is talking about caution, is that b'nei malila ninu? Malila is when you're able to roll something in your hands. If it's caution, how are you molilin in your hands? How is that possible? You can't. It's wood, but you're molilin in your hands. You're not crushing a stem in your hands. It's made out of wood. It's cushion. Doesn't make any sense. Says the Gemara, you're right. Let me give you a fuller picture of how the Beitzah on the second line of this page should have read. We are about 10 lines down. One is allowed to roll it in their fingers to create a better smell. They can even cut it to create for a better smell. When is it that these things are mutter birach? And that's only if the vegetation is soft. That's when it's mutter. But if it's very, very hard, then it's not allowed. So that's how we got out of the problem, because the Gemara says the Beitzah can't be talking about cushion because it says mololin. How does the Gemara respond? One part of the Mishnah is talking about rachin, the other part of the Mishnah is talking about cushion, and everything is fine and good. About bekashin, lo yiktemenu. When it comes to vegetation that's very hard, as good as it may smell, you're not allowed to prepare it and cut it. That's not allowed. That's not what Rabbi Yehuda was talking about at the top of the page. And if you did, what's the din? V'im kitamo. And if in fact you cut them, patur avalasar, that's an isser derabanan. Lachtos boshina lo yiktemenu. You should not break off a piece of wood in order to clean out your teeth. Right, so all of that explains our Beitzah, explains our Mishnah and the statement of Rabbi Yehuda as to how it could be that there is no tikkun kli. What's the lamaisa of this? The lamaisa is that if you have vegetation separated from the ground and it happens to smell good, so if it's soft, no problem. You can, on Yontif, you can cut it, you can roll it in your hands. If it's cushion, you're not allowed to do any of that. And you're certainly not allowed to make a toothpick out of something in order to clean out your teeth. You should just stock some in your house, and that's a much better way to go about it. Then the Gemara presents a stira in Beitzahs, which will answer the same way we just answered what we dealt with above. We're about a quarter of the way down on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. Tani chada kotmo me riachbo, but tani idach lo yiktemenu lehariachbo. So these are not the same thing. One thing says that you're allowed to cut and smell. The other says you're not allowed to cut and smell. What do we do with these two Beitzahs? The same exact answer we gave before. When do we say kotmo that you're allowed to cut it? That's true only when it's rachin, only when it's soft. However, if it's koshen, then it is absolutely not allowed. So says the Gemara, let's try to compare this to a little bit of another world. Maskif la Rav Acha bar Yaakov. The koshen, Amaylo, the fact that it is a harder type of vegetation, why would that prevent you? Maishna, how is this different? Mehaditnan, from the Mishnah that tells us shover adam es hechavis lechel mimena grogros, that one is allowed to tear apart and just break a barrel open. You're telling me you can't cut a small twig that's already been cut from vegetation in order to make it smell? But why? You're allowed to totally break a barrel open to get to the food. Your whole intention is simply to just get to the food on the inside. And furthermore, just to compound things, Rava bar Rav Ada, the Ravin bar Rav Ada, the Amri Tarvayo Kiavin and Rav Yehuda, that when they were with Rav Yehuda, have a mefasheach v'yahivlan alusa alusa. He was mefasheach. He would peel away pieces of wood that smelled very good. V'yahivlan alusa alusa. He would give us a piece after piece. He would give us slivers of the wood that smelled very good. Sometimes the bark of a tree or the flesh of a tree can smell good. And what type of wood was it? Afal gav, even though the chazia lekitza the narge v'chatzini, even though it could have been the handle of a very sharp axe or some type of cutting thing. So that shows you it's very hard. So it's caution, and he's peeling it. So I don't understand. Why are we saying that the cushion, when the vegetation is kasha, that you're not allowed to do anything with it? But over here, we see two samples of where you are allowed to. Says the Gemara halfway down, lo kasha. Don't worry, your question is not really a question. Ha Rabbi Eliezer, ha Rabbanan. These two different tracks where A, caution is a problem, and B, caution is not a problem, is really just a fundamental machlokas in the Tanoim between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. And here's the Beitzah that teaches us their shitas. The Beitzah can be a little difficult to read. We're halfway down on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. The Tanya, the Beitzah writes as follows: Rabbi Eliezer Omer, no tel adam kisei mishalafanav lachtos boshina. Rabbi Eliezer is lenient. One is allowed to take a kisei, a little piece of wood that is in front of him to clean out his teeth. You're not allowed to pick it up unless it's in the trough of an animal, unless it's in the I can't remember what that thing is called. It hangs off of his face where they feed animals. There's a better word for it. I can't remember what it is. The Shavin, and they both agree, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim both agree that it's not appropriate to cut a toothpick out. It's just that if you have one in front of you, that's where their machlokes is. All right. This next part of the Mishnah is not this part of them agreeing. This is now back to Rabbi Eliezer. And if in fact you did cut it, lachtos boshinav, to make yourself a toothpick, or to make a key, to dig out something that would help you open a door. Bishogeg b'Shabbos, if you did it by accident on Shabbos, chayv chatas, you have to bring a korban. And if it was b'mezid b'yom tov, had it been intentional on Yom Tov, sofeg es harbaim, under those circumstances, you would get malkos harbaim, you'd get nisr do nisr lab, Divri Rabbi Eliezer. What did the Chachamim say? They'd say in both cases, it's only a din derabbanan. So they have a fundamental argument in regards to the making of a toothpick from a larger piece of wood. Rabbi Eliezer would say that it's an Isser Doraisa, and the Chachamim say that it's an Isser Derabbanan. How then does this come back to our case of caution? So it says the Gemara, it explains for us 2/3 of the way down. Rabbi Eliezer de Ka'amar Hasam Chayiv Chatas. Rabbi Eliezer, who says that it's Chayiv Chatas in regards to the making of a toothpick. Hacha Pater Avalasar. Here, in regards to the case of caution of the wood, that's very hard wood that you're trying to break up, that's going to be an Isser Derabanan. But in the Rabbanan de Ka'amre Hasam Pater Avalasar, and over there, in the case of making a toothpick, we would say that it's only an Isser Derabanan, which was the lenient sheet of the Rabbanan, Hacha Mutter Lechatchila. Here by the caution, it's Mutter Lechatchila. So that's how we can explain the two different tracks in the world of vegetation that's caution, one strict, one lenient. That's how we then see the opinions of Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. And then the Gemara says, V'les Leila Rabbi Eliezer. What about Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer is so strict. Doesn't he hold of the Mishnah that says, you're not allowed? What does he do? Tachlis, like at the end of the day, we have a Mishnah that's explicit that allows for us to break open a barrel. So how can he say that it's usher? That Mishnah is explicit and it's mutter. V'vach lo yiskavin lasos kli. So says the Gemara that really what we would say in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Rav Ashi explains, Amar Rav Ashi, and with this we're going to close, Kitanya Hahi, when that Mishnah was taught about Shover Esechavis, that was b'mustaki. That was a barrel that was already broken, and it was restuck together with some clay. Just interesting to note that the word mastik means gum. I don't know if they are similar in their etymology. They seem similar, which is that it's a sticky material that resealed the barrel. And that's why you're allowed to, huh?
It's also English. Mastic.
What does that mean?
Blue.
What?
Blue.
Is that what it's called?
As a professional Scrabble player. Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
If you go to Home Depot and ask them, for mastic, they'll send you to the.
Oh, I've never heard the word. Okay, I didn't even know that. That's you're like a carpenter now. Okay.
Dr. Karesh, you've heard of that before? What?
Mastic glue? Yeah. Of course you have. Of course. Yeah, I make it in my backyard all the time. I'm not part of the Karesh family on this one. I'm out. I am out.
I knew chewing gum.
That's why that was my association. Yeah, so that's what the Mefarshim here explain, is that the barrel was held together that way, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer allowed for it to be broken. Otherwise, had it been a full barrel, then it would not be allowed to be separated. We're going to stop right here, 10 lines from the bottom at Umegabe Bina Chatzer. We'll pick up tomorrow night Emir Tashem with Daf Lamed Daled. Wishing you all a beautiful night.